I'm holding in my hand the new album by the Flamingos.
Yeah.
Which is called Color Them Beautiful.
Yes.
Right? And Jake, you did the cover design on it, which has a huge pink flamingo there.
That's the logo of the Flamingos.
And a golf club in one hand. What is that, a fire?
No, that's actually it's a musical note, but that's what it actually
looks like a golf club.
Yeah, it may look that, but that's what it actually is.
And a top silk hat in the other one.
Yeah. And as he go away, he's bowing to the flamingos.
For sure. For sure. I noticed on the end of the album here, it says, let's see, I think the question was asked, and they asked you like, well, Zeke, since you wrote the back of the cover here, what was the story? They decided to ask you about, to speak of colors in some sense?
In terms of what, in colors in terms of what we thought about music itself. Since we had done so many different varieties of records, they asked us, well, just how do you look at music?
And if I can interrupt you here and read this thing that ZEEK wrote on the back of this album, and to your question there, to us gentlemen, creative music is a limitless profession, showing itself in many colors and a million different shades. So should you ever decide to color the flamingos, may we suggest the colors of a tropical rainbow and the many shades of a Canadian sunset.
That's right.
Very well said. Very well said. And you have a lot of new songs on here.
Yes, we do.
A lot of new songs. How did you find making this album to be? Was like the recording techniques that are used when you did this album just lately. Did you find the whole scene a lot different in the studio than it was before?
Well, I tell you what. The difference now and let's say 10, 12 years ago is they have a lot more. Since I got into producing myself, we do our own things now. I just found that there's just a lot more in the studio now in terms of electronic devices, just to confuse a person. You know, like you can cut 24 tracks, man. You know, and really, what it all boils down to is getting everything to sound right so it can go onto one, or maybe two for stereo purposes. And if you're right, you know, if you go in and you sing right, you balance things right, you know, you can the engineer can cut off, let's say, about 20 of those tracks very easily. He can cut off 22 of them, you know, because if you're right, it's going to come out right.
It's going to be beautiful, Zeke, because whenever, like, we don't have the people, like, out in the audience right now, don't have the receiver sets available to, like, play quad. When I speak of quad, I mean, like, 16-track stereo.
Right.
You know. But when they get them, and recording, I mean, they're already doing records. They're already doing records in quadraphonic stereo now. But when you can isolate so many instruments and so many different things, folks out there I'm talking to right now, when you can isolate so many things, you can imagine you'll be able to have a receiver at home. It'll either be on tape, and they have records now that'll pick it up, but if you have to have like a special tuner and a special receiver, you know, to hear it at home. But like, you'll be able to have like 4 speakers around your home. And like, they won't all, you might only have like 4 different sets of tracks coming out, you know, of each speaker. But you'll have like, you might have the drums and something else running from speaker 1 to speaker 3, and also another riff on the drums coming out of speaker 4, going over to speaker 2, and crossing back and forth. So whenever you're sitting in the middle of it, and you close your eyes, you're like completely enveloped in the sound, and it's beautiful. And if any of you ever get a chance to, somebody invites you to a recording studio where you can hear this, and you know, just appreciate it. It's fantastic, because you go back like in 1952, 1954, when there was like 1 or 2 microphones,
right?
You know, just in the studio, right?
Really, right.
You know, and you just did your best, and how it came out was the way the record came out.
That was the way it came out. But I find it very interesting to record with several different tracks. If you know what you're doing, you know, it is an advantage, and that And just what you were explaining, I've experienced it, and it is fantastic. It's fantastic. I've experienced that.
Jake, when to go back to that question I was talking about when you were in your tour across the United States, when you were playing in the different cities, and the Flamingos, you know, have been in all the different shows across the states. Back to that feeling of the different audiences. Like, we know that the New York audience is so totally dedicated and loyal because the records was like born here. They lived here, and the people felt it here. Like, New York is like the smallest town I've ever been in my life. You know, it's the smallest town because everything is neighborhoods, and friends are closer here than any small town you've ever been. But how is the reaction like in other cities who did not have that close, intimate group sound that happened here in New York? What was that like when you were playing around, like the reaction of audience and people that you talked to?
Well, see, this was the type of thing that we had to come up with ourselves in order to I'll say, to incorporate that New York feeling,
right,
that New York reception. You know,
so you had to super entertain.
This is the reason why a great deal of our performance was audience participation.
Right.
See, because New York, you know, like myself, I say New York is the greatest city in the world. All the rest of them are suburbs.